Yes, this workshop will be about technical interviews. It's catered towards like data science, software engineering, machine learning engineering, those types of roles, because that's what we're here for. So we'll also have a little section about online assessments, but we'll get to that later. Okay, so here's the overview of all the topics we're gonna go over. Yeah, so I guess we'll just jump right in, and we'll share this slide deck in the Discord afterwards. So don't feel like you need to take screenshots or anything like that. But yeah, follow along. We'll start off with kind of what the technical interviews are and why this should be important to you as a student. All right, so a technical interview kind of comes in a lot of different forms. Obviously, since COVID, the number of virtual kind of formats has increased. So there's a lot of recordings, but generally these are kind of live environments, which means you're in an interview with another person, right? And you have to show up on time, you have to look professional, you have to act professional. And in these interviews, you're going to be taking tests often and just answering questions. And these are to test you on areas like programming, data analysis, math, such as like probability and statistics. And then you're just kind of domain knowledge if it's like a financial role or a research role or something like that. Then they might ask you those types of questions, or more generally, business application through like case studies. And often, even if an interview is labeled as a technical interview, they'll still ask you some questions towards the end that might be more behavioral in style, such as like how you solve problems, or if you're a leader, or if you can communicate well, kind of targeting those types of targets. Yeah, so that's kind of what a technical interview is. So, and this is not the first stage of the application process. Usually you'll have to take an online assessment first or do some sort of phone screening where it'll be shorter and less formal. This is more, they've narrowed it down to a few candidates and they're taking you seriously. So this is something you should really prepare for because it means you have a good shot at getting this job.
So why you want to learn about technical interviews? So if you guys, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the interview process for a data science role, but about 50 to 70% of that entire interview process is made up of either technical interviews or online assessments that test your technical knowledge. So by preparing for these kind of interviews, it will really help you to showcase that you have a strong foundation in your technical skills that allows you to be able to handle the technical skill sets that needed for that specific role. And like Trey said before, a technical interview, you would sometimes have like online assessments that also test your technical skills. And I think them as the stepping stone into the interview process because a lot of times for bigger companies, they don't have the time to interview like hundreds and thousands of people. So it really depends on your performance on these technical assignments to actually meet an HR or a live interviewer in future interview process.
Hi, okay, Flora, the recording, I'm not entirely sure if the recording will be posted or if it's even going to save properly, but we're just going to try it out. But you can maybe check our YouTube channel. It'll be mentioned in the Discord announcement as well. Okay, so to continue, so some of the concepts that they go over during these interviews, as I mentioned before, it's, a lot of data science is a very broad field, so there's a lot of different subtopics. So some of the places to start, I'd say, are from data structures and algorithms questions. These are going to be found in all of your software engineering and data science and machine learning roles. But then if you're looking for more data science, data analyst, specific roles, you'll find some questions that are also on statistics and probability. And then for data scientists, data engineering, you'll see machine learning and data analysis questions. And so kind of what these look like before I continue. So like a data structures and algorithms questions, these will be relatively short. They might be with code, or they might be more of a general question. They'll ask you how you're going to solve the question. So it might be, oh, what data structure would you use to sort this? Or if you were going to implement a function that does this problem, how would you do that? And you'd have to be like, oh, I'd use an array because you can access items in constant time or something. So you're going to have to explain your answers because this is a live environment. A statistics and probability question, those can range anywhere from basic probability of, how many, using like conditional probabilities, there might be like how many coin flips would it take for something to be biased or not. And then a machine learning question, data analysis, they might give you a schema for a data set. So they might tell you like what the columns are and the types and the kind of general context. And then they might ask you how you would deal with missing data, or they might ask you to do some sort of aggregate analysis where you're maybe doing some sort of group by. And then they get more sophisticated towards more machine learning roles. Coding challenges and SQL queries. So these are going to be questions kind of on those past three topics, but you're going to have to do code live in front of the interviewer. This is a kind of a challenging skill. So, because obviously at school, we're just doing these projects on our own time and in a private space. So it's good to kind of think about and even practice this. We'll kind of get into that more later, but just know that the interviewers are going to be watching you code live. And then one of the last kind of concepts they go over is case studies in real world problem solving scenarios. So these might be more business focused, let's say. So questions where they'll give you a business type, like let's say something that sells an online service, like a job application portal, and they might tell you, oh, what are some metrics that they would track for this service? Or, if you had to present to stakeholders this product, what might be the advantages or what might be the downfalls, or how would you use data to support this? And they would kind of give you these specific scenarios to see how you would react and how good you are at identifying the weaknesses and strengths. And for a lot of these, it's okay to not know the answer right away or at all. Like you might never get the right answer, but if you can show the interviewer that you have the right problem solving skills on how you think through it and how you communicate to them and how you ask questions, you can always question the question. These are some of the things that they're looking for, because they're just looking for people. They're not looking for someone that's done this exact problem before. So here are kind of some broad categories for technical interviews, which kind of coincides with the types of questions they ask. But there's strictly coding interviews where they might tell you up front in their email, like, oh, when you come in, you're just going to be working on programming questions with the interviewer, and kind of on those topics. There might be more data analysis interviews where, let's say, you're interviewing for that data analysis role, and they might tell you ahead of time that it's a data analysis interview, and you're going to expect them to give you a data set and have to manipulate that. And so these are kind of giving you the context of what you should brush up on before you go into the interview. And these are also, right now, you should be thinking about what kind of roles interest you, what you think you're going to apply to in the future, and therefore what you're going to practice. Case study interviews. These are, again, more business analyst positions. They're going to have you discuss your strategy and have you offer recommendations on how you might present something to someone else. Okay, and then so metrics, you might be talking about outcomes and how a good or service has strengths and weaknesses. Machine learning interviews, these are again just going to be on a data set and might be talking about the pipeline. And so you might be talking about models, why you would choose a model, how you would analyze the performance of that model, those kinds of questions.
So how to prepare for a technical interview? So first, before you start doing any of the lead code questions or anything like that, you should always build a study plan for yourself, and that plan should be realistic. So don't say you're gonna do lead code questions 10 hours a day, because that's not realistic, and you're not gonna follow that plan. So maybe start by taking small steps at first and slowly build up the time you do the code questions or practice questions, and just make sure you stay on top of your plan, which will help you to better prepare for these interviews. And there are a lot of online resources that helps you prepare for these technical interviews, like LeetCode or HackerRank. Or HackerRank is actually a website that's used by real companies to do their online assessments. So it's always good to practice in these test-like environments and prepare you mentally to take the online assessments. And don't forget to time yourself, because oftentimes there's a time limit when you do an online assessment or a technical interview live with the interviewer. Besides doing some questions on your own, it's also a good idea to conduct mock interviews with your friends, peers, or mentors, where they can help you to give you advice on what to improve on during your interview process. And last but not least, repetition is key. So if you want to get the hang of a concept, keep doing questions that's related to the same concept, and eventually you will be able to ace that topic.
And so once you've kind of prepared in advance for it, then comes the day of, right? So you're walking into the interview. Some of the things you're probably going to want to bring, besides some of the more behavioral aspects like dressing nice, you're going to want to have like pen and paper. So they may provide this to you, but you always want to become prepared just in case. You're going to want to be able to draw diagrams, do some scratch work. You might have to do these writings kind of on a whiteboard in front of the interviewer as well, or on a computer, but it's always good to be prepared. One of the biggest things is to understand the problem that they're asking you, because sometimes they actually leave out key details, or there might be multiple different ways to solve the problem, depending on the interpretation. So you want to either explain to the interviewer how you interpreted it, or ask them how they think you should look at the problem. It's okay to say, oh, I understand the problem to this point. Now I would need this resource to move forward. And they might be able to offer you that resource, but you don't know that until you talk with them. This is a very two-way communication environment. And so also, like I said before, you want to show your thought process all throughout. And it's okay if you don't get to the final answer, or if you need help along the way. But it's important not to just give up or kind of blank out. You got to stay composed and try different things.
So some importance of before and after the interview is that remember that every interaction with the recruiter or the hiring manager or interviewer is a chance to show your professionalism and communication skills. So it's always a good idea to follow up either after an interview or even like during like a career fair. Like every time you meet up with like a professional, it's always good to follow up with them, and also thank them for their time that they spend to do the interview with you, because a lot of time the interviewers would be actual employees in these companies or in the role that you apply to. So they're usually pretty busy, and just thank them for their time to do the interview with you. And use professional language and attire. Make sure you dress properly. Of course, dress comfortably, but make sure it's appropriate attire. And just be confident. Show. Do not like Trey said before. If you don't know don't know the answer to a question, still just be confident and ask questions. Show that you are passionate about it. And all these tips and tricks are applied to behavioral questions too. So stay tuned for an in-depth behavioral interview prep workshop later this year.
Okay, so to kind of pivot a little bit, um, this is online assessments are another part of the hiring process, but they're kind of similar to technical interviews. So we kind of wanted to include some information here. So these can be taken before or after the interview, but normally these are a screening process before, and they help kind of find the best candidates. So they're usually through, like if you're applying to a company, this company is going to use another service to administer the coding assignment. So let's say you're applying to Amazon. You're going to take the coding assessment on a different website, and this website might be one that you take this exam once, and they'll use your results for a bunch of different companies for your application at Amazon and Google and Facebook, something like that. And so there's a couple different kinds, but all of them are usually at home, timed. They might have you turn on a camera, but maybe not. And they might track where your activity on your screen is. So it's just things have advanced to where it's basically like you're doing it in front of someone else. But obviously you're just going to have to read what the instructions say on whether you can use, the internet or documentation. But regardless, you're going to want to show, just like in the technical interview, do as much of the problem that you can, even if it's a hard question, because sometimes they might only be three hard questions, or it could be a bunch of little ones. So it just kind of depends. And in that case, if there's many questions, you may want to do the ones you're most comfortable with first to be able to show what you can in the time, because you may not get to them all. Some of the other so there's programming questions that you'll have to write out code in usually a language of your choice, and you're going to want to include comments and kind of have a structure. So when you're going through and solving this, just like in the technical interview, you're going to want to kind of have an approach identified beforehand that you can walk through that you've practiced. But there's other types of online assessments that are more logic, reasoning, and problem solving targeted. So they may not involve any code. They may just be little word games, logic puzzles, things that can test kind of how quick you react, how good your memory is, um, and kind of just test your like fluid intelligence. So those is just kind of to make you aware that that's part of the process when you're applying to a lot of data science related roles. So here are some questions that we wanted to include that are more data science related, not software engineering. And these are just kind of an example of some of the things they may ask that are not, programming questions, but that are related to the concepts like we talked about statistics, and machine learning. So naive Bayes, that's a type of machine learning, something that we've learned in 40A, if you guys have gotten there. Recursive dimensionality, cross validation, k-means clustering. So these are all machine learning techniques and evaluations. So these are things that you may or may not be learning in your classes, which is why you want to use these outside sources like HackerRank and LeetCode, or they also have some other like websites and books that you can go over that will talk about in depth all the concepts you should prepare for. And hopefully most of them you've covered in your classes and they're just review, but sometimes there are things that you've missed that it's good to check out. There's also lots of websites that have these questions that you can go through and kind of ask yourself or ask with a partner we talked about before.
So for next, we're gonna move on to some coding example questions. So before we move on to that, I just want to ask if you have any questions, feel free to unmute or drop it in the chat.
Will these slides be available after this is done?
Sure, I can answer that. Yes, they will be posted. A link to them should be posted in our Discord.
Okay, cool, because these questions would be good to refer back to.
We can add a slide at the end of this presentation that kind of has some link to some other resources too. But even a quick Google search, you'll find a lot of stuff.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
any other questions?
You guys all experts already?
Okay, well, move on to our code or example coding question or technical interview question now. And if you guys have any questions, we can leave it after this section. So this is a question that you might be asked during a technical interview. So like Trey said before, an online assessment and a technical interview live with an interviewer might be a little bit different. So for a lot of times, if it's live with the interviewer, they would not give you all the information you need. So they'll probably just start with the problem statement, like here, given an integer array nums sorted in non-decreasing order, remove the duplicates in place such that each unique element appears only once. The relative order of the elements should be kept the same. Then return the number of unique elements in the nums. So maybe straight up, they would just give you this and ask you to start implementing a function. So it's really important that you ask follow-up questions on anything that you're not clear about. So for example, you might ask, what do you do with, since you're like removing it in place, what do you do with the rest of the elements in the list? So then they will probably provide you with extra information like here saying, change the array nums such that the first k elements of the nums contains the unique elements in the order that they were presented in nums initially. Then the remaining elements of nums are not important as well as the size of nums. So now you know some extra information where you know, since we want to get the unique elements, there will be some extra room at the end of the list where it will not be used in the result. So it's just some good information that you want to know by asking questions to your interviewer. And then it's also good to ask the constraints of this question. For example, you want to know what's the possible length of the nums array or the list. It will be between 1 and 3 times 10 to the 4th. So you know that it will not be an empty array. So this should also help you when you are in your thought process of thinking how to approach this question. And then it's also important to come up with some example inputs and outputs, either provided by the interviewer, or you can think of your own kind of test cases to go through with your thoughts and or your code to make sure that you're on the right track and you're actually approaching the question right. So since this is not like a coding event or anything like that, I'm just gonna show the answer to you here. So to approach this question, we would use 2 pointers where we would keep the first pointer, or let me show you an example to kind of go through this. So you would kind of, before you actually write down any code, it's always good to kind of just go through it in your head or write down on a paper, or like what I'm gonna do here, where I'll show you how this code move along an example. So first you would start with your pointer 1. Oh, and also make sure you have comments for your code. That not only helps you to remember what your thought process was, this will also help the interviewer to note or understand your code. So so first we have the pointer 1j, which is 0. So it's on the first element in the array. Oops, yeah, okay. And then we're using a for loop because we want to loop through the array to check if there's any duplicates elements. So we would have another pointer I, where it starts from the second element, which is at index 1. And then we would check if the element at index 0, which is the pointer 1, and the element at index 1, if they're the same, or if they're not the same, we or in this case, they're the same. So then we would iterate through this loop again, and then move the pointer to the next position. which is index 2. And then, oops, index 2 here. Okay. So now we see that the element at index 0, which is where our first pointer's at, is different from the element at index 2, which is where our second pointer's at. Then based on the code here, we know that we would add one more index to the first pointer. So it'll move to the second pointer, change it to whatever value it is at the second pointer, so that we would have unique values in this non-decreasing order, or like its origin order, at the front of the array, which is what this function or this question is asking for. And then it's also really important that you read the question carefully, because it asks you to return the number of unique elements in the nums. So make sure you don't just return the output array, because it's actually asking you how many unique elements is in nums, which is j plus 1 which is 1 plus 1 is 2. So like 1 and 2, there are 2 unique elements in the array. So it's important that when you do these kind of questions, don't overthink on syntax, because a lot of time, if it's a live interview, you won't even be able to run your code on an actual example or just execute your code anywhere. So it's more about your thought process. And I don't know if you guys have taken 20 or 30, just like how you take those finals and midterms. Syntax doesn't really matter as much, but still make sure you know what you're writing when you're doing the interview.
Did everybody follow along on that example? Do you have any questions? No? All right. Well, we'll move on to the next example. Okay, so this example is going to be focusing more on, I guess, a data set question. So I'll read through it real quick. Tesla is investigating production bottlenecks and they need your help to extract the relevant data. Write a query to determine which parts have begun the assembly process but are not yet finished. So this is a pretty short question, and here they gave us some of the assumptions. In person, these might be things you have to ask about. Keep that in mind, but for an online code, online assessment, they might give this to you. So the assumptions are going to be that the table contains all parts currently in production, each at different stages, and that an unfinished part is one that doesn't have a finished date. So if we look at the question again, it says to determine which parts have begun the process but are not yet finished. And that tells us right in the assumptions that that's when it doesn't have a finished date. So we can already kind of start to think about what our solution is going to be. But here we'll look at some of the examples first. So they give us the schema for the data set, which has the column names and types. So we've got different parts of, it looks like a car, because Tesla, and then the finished date of when it completed producing that part and what step it was on. Okay, so then they've got the example output as well. And so we can already see the pattern pretty clearly from this example that there's the finished dates missing, and that's exactly what we're going to return. So this example, we're actually going to solve it using a SQL query, but you could possibly do this in Python as well. So for SQL queries, what you're going to start with is the from clause. Lauren, you can advance it one click. Yeah, okay, we looked at the question, is the assumptions. All right, so we're going to start with the from clause. So we know there's only one table in this question, so this is pretty easy. We just put the name of the table here. And if you don't know SQL, you'll just kind of follow along anyways. It's not too bad, but we're going to kind of access the data this way. So the next, we're going to want to think about what we're returning in the output. So the output, we can see we're returning the parts and the assembly steps. So those are the column names, and that's going to be what we're selecting from the table. And then lastly, we want to think about which subset of the data we want to access. So we only want the parts that aren't finished. and we know that that's where the finish date is missing, aka it's null. And so we add a where clause. It's basically filtering out our data and getting us a return statement. But that's kind of the order you want to think about it, and this is your resulting code. But the main thing is this is kind of giving you an outline of what these questions are going to look like and how you might want to walk through it. Does anybody have any questions on that one? You guys are a quiet bunch. All right. So this next example, we're not going to walk through how to solve it, but we'll look at the question. So this is asking about managers of the business. So we have that example table down below, and we're looking for managers that have 5 direct reports. And what that means is that they're managed, they have 5 people, 5 different people have that person as their manager. So as you can see there, John has 6 direct reports, 5 direct reports. Okay, it's a very minimal example. But next, we're going to look at kind of some of the solutions to this problem and see that there's actually quite a lot of ways to solve it. So, Lauren, if you want to tap through, okay, so here's one solution from online, and you'll notice they're using Python. They have comments. They kind of explain their code, so you can envision that they maybe started with a simple group by and then worked their way up. They're using a function isIn, and they're using a temporary variable. These are things that may or may not be improved. So there's lots of different functions kind of do the same thing. And there's also a lot of different, time and space complexities that we'll see. So can you advance a couple more times? Okay, like 2 more. Okay, so these kind of all use different pandas functions, and yet they all do the same thing. And so this is kind of just to point out that your solution may not be the most efficient when you first start. So what you can kind of do is go back. If you have extra time, you might want to go back and review, oh, is this the cleanest way I can write this? Oh, is this, the methods I learned in class, or is this something I learned on my own? Like, do I trust that I'm doing this right? And then also we have an example in the upper right that's a SQL query. So you could also solve this using other languages. But yeah, there's not always a right answer. And as long as you can explain what your complexities are, that is also ideal, because they'll often ask that. And sometimes your answer needs to be at a certain complexity level. You can't just write for loops to solve your problem. You might have to do some tricky stuff with pointers like we did on that past example.